The member from Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to make my contributions in support of this Stalking Civil Jurisdiction Bill 2018. In truth, I had not planned to speak to this motion, but I find myself led by the Spirit, and I am trying to listen to that ever-quiet voice, so that is the reason why I've decided to rise. Let me begin by saying good day to the constituents of Prospect, whom I have the pleasure to represent, as well as the wider Cayman Islands, either tuned in live to our proceedings or certainly in the replay this evening. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, before I make my substantive remarks in support of this Stalking Civil Jurisdiction Bill 2018, I wonder if you will allow me to briefly extend my deep personal condolences to the family of the late Mr. Danny Hugh, who himself was a constituent of Prospect. I had many conversations with Mr. Hugh, both during the election campaign and many times after being elected, and I say with all honesty and sincerity that he and those conversations will be sadly missed. I would like to extend heartfelt condolences first to my colleague, the Honourable Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure, and secondly, of course, to his immediate family, some of whom still reside in Prospect during this very difficult time. To the bill, Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank my unity government and the Attorney General for agreeing to further strengthen legislation in the Cayman Islands that will seek to further protect women and children in these islands. This is important to me, Mr. Speaker, because both the protection of women and children formed part of a significant pledge that I made to the constituents of Prospect in my manifesto, and I'm happy to see that this legislation is now being brought, which I think is very timely. We will recall in September, whilst we were on the Sister Islands, introducing legislation to protect our children against child predators by the introduction of grooming legislation, and likewise we are here today to seek support for the introduction of legislation to protect women against stalking. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the definitions already offered up by the Honourable Attorney General, stalking has been defined as a repetitive pattern of unwarranted, harassing, or threatening behavior, one person against another. And one of the reasons behind passing legislation or introducing legislation to protect against stalking is to help prevent future violence. Well, whilst it was certainly stated by the Attorney General in his contribution that it has been identified that stalking has become a serious matter for concern here in the Cayman Islands, I think it is important, therefore, that we all support what is the first step in establishing the legal framework to address the civil issues related to stalking. Again, we will address the criminal issues relating to the same in the subsequent Penal Code Amendment number 2 bill, which will come thereafter. And whilst, Mr. Speaker, I do not have any hard statistics before me this afternoon in the context of the Cayman Islands, according to the National Violence Against Women survey published by the University of Missouri, 8% of women and 2% of men have reported being stalked at some point in their lives. That equates to 1 out of every 12 women and 1 out of every 45 men. have been affected by stalking. And as such, legislation to protect citizens against stalking exists in all 50 states of the United States and has been in existence in the United Kingdom since 1997 under the Protection from Harassment Act 1997. I think that this legislation is very timely, and I thank again the members and colleagues of this unity government for embracing the need to introduce this legislation, which I hope, following comments that we have already received from members making their contribution to this bill, that at the end of the day, we will see legislation introduced to, again, further strengthen and protect women of these beloved Cayman Islands. I, for one, Mr. Speaker, will be voting yes in support of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.